I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and welcome to night one of the Spring Mini Skein mini-series. For 2023, my inspiration is my favorite video game in the whole world, Pokemon. If you're not a video game fan, don't worry, I'm not going to be talking a ton about the game during this video, but I will be showing off some of these little adorable pocket monsters that will be my color inspiration for each night. There are over 1,000 Pokemon that I could choose for color inspiration. And as you can see, we could create a whole rainbow with Pokemon. But I specifically went and tried to pick families of Pokemon that involve multiple colors and have a change in color as they evolve. Because when you level up a Pokemon, eventually it'll evolve into a new form, either once or twice, depending on the species. And so for night one, I thought about picking fire Pokemon and looked around at a bunch of the fire starters and their evolutions and finally settled on one that I haven't actually played with a lot, but I really loved the pattern and the color. And this is the Tepig family. Tepig evolves into Pignite, who evolves into Emboar. And I enjoyed the contrast of the flame-like colors with black and gray, and thought that we could create something that kind of evoked some flame colors, but then also had some really great contrast with black. Dharma Trading Company has a My Palette section, and so when you're playing around with the different acid dyes, you can kind of pull the swatch over there, and this is really handy for making different color palettes, and I use that a lot in all of these videos. And so I pulled some colors that also fit this sort of fire theme. I picked Blazing Orange, Cayenne Red, Brilliant Yellow, True Black, but then also Silver Gray. Silver Gray and True Black have a very similar tone to one another, but the Silver Gray is a lot less pigmented, which can come in handy, and I'll explain more about that later on. The Spring Mini Skein mini-series is a weekly event of nightly videos. There are going to be 5 videos that feature the dyeing of mini skeins, and this year, sock blanks as well. I'm super excited to do some fun comparisons of a technique on a sock blank versus mini skeins and why you might want to dye one versus the other, all in these videos. And then there'll be a bonus full skein yarn dyeing video and a vlog of everything that went on behind the scenes at the end. All of these videos will come out at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time. And so please subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any videos. I am launching all of these videos as premieres with a live chat room so we can hang out, and I'm going to be there as much as I can so that way we can chat and just react to the videos. It's so much fun. I love it a lot. But now let's go take a look at the multiple yarn bases we will be dyeing, because one other really fun aspect of this series is that I dye a lot of different yarn bases with the same technique, and then we can see if there's any differences, any standouts for a particular colorway, and it's just a fun way to compare fiber types in addition to playing with techniques. Lots going on, but let's go look at some twisted mini skeins. One of my favorite parts of the SMSMS is dyeing a lot of different yarn bases with the same technique to see how similar or sometimes different the way the colorways end up. I'm going to list the fiber types on the screen right now, but the yarn bases we have are Crazy 8 DK, Platinum DK, That Yak Sock, I think this is Donegal Sock is the name. We have Platinum Sock, and then finally we have the High Twist MCN, the Merino Cashmere Nylon. Most of these are primarily merino wool. The main difference from all of these bases is that a couple of them do have nylon in it, and of course our That Yak does have some yak fiber, which gives it this deeper color to start off with. Now I do need to sort out our mini skeins to dye our yarn. We're gonna have one set of minis that are just gonna be twisted as they were. Next, we're gonna take 2 minis of each of these types, but keep them a little bit separate from one another. We'll organize them separately, and these 2 will go ahead and pre-soak. And now with our final 2 groups, we're gonna open up 3 minis. I'm choosing 1 DK and 2 fingering for this bundle, and we're gonna twist them together. The nice thing is that you can see a little bit of all of them, But so now we have 3 skeins twisted together, and we're gonna do the same thing over here. And again, all the sets have 1 DK and 2 fingering weight yarns in there, and we're gonna twist this up while dry. This is gonna provide some resist. And so what we're gonna end up with is different amounts of surface area exposed. So here, where the twist is a little bit lighter, there's more surface area of that yarn. We're gonna get more of that color. Here, we'll get a little bit less, but the color patches might be larger. And so then finally, can you imagine what we might do? I'm gonna take all 6, and we're gonna twist them together. And so this final bundle is gonna be 120 grams of yarn total. And hopefully we'll be able to see a little bit of each one on the outside, but I think it might be a little hard to say for sure. So right now, just twisted, it's bundled up, but I am going to sort of move it around and open it up here. And this is the 360 grams of yarn that's gonna go into our first dye bath. Now, the fun thing with having 2 bases that are a little bit deeper than the others is that I can see a little bit of each of them on the outside here, which is good. And so therefore, it's likely that we have a little bit of the 4 main bare bases on the outside here as well. I expect the patches of color to get larger and larger, but there's overall going to be less color on these than there is on here, is my prediction. But we're gonna dye this all together in 1 pot. I know I said I was gonna pre-soak 2 sets of our minis, but I'm actually only pre-soaking 1 set. The other set I'm gonna keep dry because we're gonna dye the dry set with a tonal black, and starting dry will give a little bit more variation potentially. So that one can be dry, but this one is wet. Because we want it wet like the yarn that we're heating for our second layer. The first color we're gonna dye is a black, or at least a very dark gray. I'm adding 90 milliliters of a 1% stock solution of true black. So this is 0.9 grams of dye. And I picked this ratio of dye to the 360 grams of yarn that we're dyeing based on Dye Put Weekly 425, where I dyed twisted skeins of yarn in true black, and because that was a ratio that I liked. Now this kettle started with 32 cups of water, and we have no acid in here yet. And so now I'm going to add the yarn and let it sink in. Oh, I went to go get the tongs, but the yarn sunk in. Okay, but now I want to add some acid. Let's see, I think I'm going to do 8 tablespoons. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And this is probably going to need to cook for a while. But okay, with our 32 cups of water, all right, we have plenty of space. So in theory, I would be able to fit more yarn in here, at least I think. But anyway, I'm expecting this to take a while. It doesn't need to absorb all of the color. It's okay if we end up with some color left in the dye bath. If we reach a point where I like the color I see on the yarn, we can go ahead and remove it. But anyway, I'm gonna set a timer for 45 minutes. It has been 45 minutes, and it looks like we've got most of the color in our yarn. Let's see, ooh, so even lifting this up, you can see some of the lighter patches. It looks like that some of our, oh, this one became untwisted. And so we can see that in here, we've got some light gray, in addition to sort of our deeper color. But when we have more of the yarn twisted, we're gonna have more white. Oh yeah, we absorbed all of the color. I mean, it's possible there's a smidge, but not bad. Does that look a little bit overexposed right now? The color is a little bit deeper, and well, we're steamy. I'm gonna set these aside to cool so we can open them up and check them out. All right, I'm gonna add 100 milliliters of the 1% stock solution of True Black, and we're gonna rinse this out. And this is where we're gonna start for our tonal layer. I know it's not gonna give us a pure black, but I really do want to start with a color as, I mean, I'm not intentionally trying to dip dye. I'm just raising and lowering to get all the yarn in there a little bit slowly, but I'm hoping to end up with a color that feels a little bit similar to what we have on our current twisted minis, which it may not be that similar. That's okay. And if we need to, we can make it even darker. We can't make it lighter, but we can add more dye if we think that that's necessary. But I'm okay with it being more charcoal gray versus true black, because maybe we'll add some speckles on top of this. I don't know yet. But anyway, I'm gonna heat this, I guess, for about 30 minutes or until the dye bath looks like it's clearing. It has been 30 minutes and all of our dye is in our yarn, which is great. And wet, this looks like it's a good fit for the other colors that we have. So I'm gonna set this aside to cool with everything else. And then we'll come back and take a look and open up the twisted minis. Okay, here we have our darkest yarn. We have our tonals. Next up, this seems like it's one of our bigger, I guess one of our 3 together sets. It's still very, very wet. You can see we still have a lot of pale gray, but we also have a lot of our deeper color. I'm curious how it'll look on all 3 skeins, but we can do that in a little bit. Here are the other ones. We've got some dark and some gray. Here is our big, I'm gonna go squeeze this out. Here's our big skein where we twisted all 6 together. Ooh, and we have a fair amount of white. I'd say probably more white left overall. And the patches of color, I love that we have like a light gray in here as well as the deeper gray. And then when it comes to our little minis, this is mostly just like black and gray, which is really exciting. Okay, I also need to squeeze these out. Here, I'll do this in the pan. I think that part of this is helped by the fact that the commercial twist in them is pretty light. Oh, this is exciting. You know, when I was doing this, I wasn't sure, like gradient wise, which way I would want to lay things out. But clearly the single skeins that are twisted, those are going to be the ones that are going to be next to the tonal in the way that I would lay out these gradients. So I just want to finish untwisting these, and then I'm going to hop off camera for a moment and divide all of this into little sets so that way I have the same yarn base together, and I'm going to secure each of them with zip ties. Okay, now we have all of our yarn laid out, including the skein of yarn that has no color on it yet, that was just pre-soaking in some water. And we're gonna speckle onto all of this yarn using our red, yellow, orange, and then to bring in a little bit of some of that black, we're gonna use silver gray, because I don't want a ton of extra pigment coming on, but I think the silver gray, I'm gonna focus sort of on the lightest skein a little bit and the darkest one. And there might be some other colors that go on the deepest one, but I think the remaining of the colors, I'm going to concentrate more on the barer patches of color. I put on my deluxe rubber respirator mask, safety glasses, and gloves. And as I was just explaining, I started speckling using this silver gray and then going into the other few colors. I tried to take a pinch of a small amount of the dye color, and then by slowly moving my gloved fingertips together, I let it fall onto the yarn to try to get a lot of these colors all over. I wanted to use a little bit less of the brilliant yellow than the blazing orange and cayenne red, but I still wanted all of these colors to be fairly randomly distributed over the yarn. Once I was happy with the coverage on one side, I flipped the yarn over, added color to the other side, and then I just did a little bit of a spot check to determine if I needed even more color on the yarn or not. Off camera, I do have a skein of Tepig Stroll figurine weight yarn, 75% superwash merino wool, 25% nylon, that I was using as a yarn mop, wiping my hands onto it throughout this whole process.
Okay, my respirator mask is still on. I popped the yarn mop into the steamer basket for just a minute, so that way I'll be able to use it to clean up the counter. That was just long enough for it to get warm, but probably didn't set things much. Actually, it's not that warm. But I'm going to come and take our 300 grams of yarn very carefully and go steam set it for 30 minutes. And as for the countertop, we're going to clean this up. And I'll get a second yarn mop for the next set of 3, I think, because now we're getting reasonable color coverage on here. Not very much of black/gray, because silver gray is a pre-mixed pastel, but that also makes it really good for speckling because it's not going to have as big of an impact as, say, true black would if we were speckling. So it's easier to do more subtle speckles overall with it. But anyway, I'm going to clean off the counter with some water, and then I think I'll put the other yarn mop just on top of here, and we'll set up to dye the rest of the yarn.
All right, it has been 30 minutes. Now we can remove the yarn. So the blazing orange, I wonder how it'll look dry. Like, I definitely see it in here, but the red is making more of a visual impact right now. Okay, if I compare the red to the orange, then I see it more. Yeah, maybe I'll see the orange more while it's dry. But anyway, I'm gonna take the yarn, go set it aside to cool so we can wash it. And now we'll finish up the rest of the yarn that we started out with. The colorway may not be as orange as the Tepig family is, but you know what? I still really like the colorway. I like the coal smoke and flames that it invokes, inspired by this fiery Pokemon. For all, even though I do have an Emboar in Pokemon Go, this isn't a Pokemon that I've really ever played with, but it's one that I liked the colors, and that ultimately is how I did select the Pokemon for each of the nights of the SMSMS. This yarn set is so much fun, but I think that it would be pretty hard for me to try to replicate some of these colorways on full skeins, because you can't twist a full skein of yarn tight enough to get patches of color that are as small as you get when you have one 20-gram mini skein twisted. But I'll talk more about that in the conclusions. Once I was satisfied with the color coverage, I went ahead and steam set this yarn for 30 minutes and then washed it off camera. But now we can go wash the first set of yarn that you watched me dye. We're about to wash the yarn, and we might see a little bleeding because I think there's a tiny bit of some powder that didn't dissolve all the way. So that is just one reason why a good wash step is important. You want to make sure things are nice and submerged in case there is any just excess color that didn't have enough water to dissolve and go into the yarn. And so therefore, seeing some color just right off the bat is not going to stress me out, especially when it's that light. So what I am going to do, not knowing what may or may not come out, so I'm going to add a little bit of some dish soap. And we're using cool water right now, but I'm going to go ahead and fill up the basin and soak the yarn for a little bit, because that will give any unbound color a chance to dissolve and rinse out of the yarn. And so we're seeing a little bit. I'm not concerned yet. But yeah, we're gonna fill this up, make sure things are nice and submerged. And now we're gonna go ahead and wait like 5-10 minutes, something like that. All right, let's see. All right, we're seeing some bleeding. It is not that bad, but you don't like to see it. But that's why we did that soak. And maybe I'm seeing a little bit of transfer onto my hands, which makes it more likely we had that undissolved dye powder on the surface than the dye not being set well. It's just, there's some dye that needs to be rinsed out. So with any luck, this time we're gonna start seeing, I would expect a little bit of bleeding because we had some before, but we should see significantly less than what we had before, because now we're rinsing out what was sort of like a sponge in here. And I'm feeling some of the orange come through more. It's just, the orange is much closer to the red than it is to the yellow. So, anyway, I'm gonna fill this up again. All right, let's see how we're doing. Okay, just the tiniest little hint, headed in the right direction. So I'm gonna go ahead and rinse this a few more times. Then I'm gonna put the yarn through my spin dryer, hang it up to dry, and we'll take a look at the finished dry yarn. But I'm expecting our other three skeins to wash very, very similarly to this one. If I notice anything, I'll let you know. This year for the SMSMS, I wanted to dye sock blanks in approximately the same colorway that I dyed on the mini skeins. Now, I can't twist the minis in different amounts as when it's a sock blank. I suppose I could add some resist to it. But instead, to approximate this colorway, I am going to dip dye 2 double-stranded sock blanks into approximately 24 cups of water with 8 tablespoons of white vinegar and 100 milliliters of our True Black acid dye. The sock blanks do have resist in there already because the stitches are knit together. And so when unraveled, which might not be shown in this video, but when they're eventually unraveled, then you can see some little micro speckling from that resist. After the dip dyeing, I let the blanks cool and then took them onto the counter to speckle with the same colors we used on the mini skeins. The 2 sock blanks I'm dyeing are double-stranded sock blanks from Knit Picks. One is Stroll, one is Hawthorne. The first is 75% superwash merino wool, 25% nylon, and the second is 80% superwash fine Highland wool, 20% polyamide. After speckling, I didn't wrap it up because I wasn't worried about color transfer. I took the yarn and steam set it for 30 minutes before washing it off camera. And then we'll show these blanks at the very end along with our mini skeins. Here is the yarn from the first round of prototypes. I am going to pick just one to lay out so we can see the 5 different colorways that we have in here really clearly. And then we'll show all of them twisted together. This set right here is on the Crazy 8 base. And I went really, really heavy with the speckles here. Some of the other ones, maybe I didn't go nearly as heavy as what we have down here, but oh, it feels so flame-like. It's really, really cool. We've got our chunkier speckles, and then because I used silver gray instead of black, that gave us more sharp speckles that carry through some of the other bases, at least a bit. We're a little overexposed right now, but you can pick out some of the yellow, and maybe you can't differentiate between the red and the orange on our darkest skein, but they're there and you can still feel that through that kettle dyed yarn. This is a more accurate representation of what it actually looks like in person. I think it's not that difficult to visualize how this may work up and how this creates a fade set where we're increasing that amount of black and gray throughout the whole yarn. But I'm really glad I added the speckles on here because that just sort of pulls everything together. Now, you could potentially just go from one mini skein to the next without blending them at all to even make that transition even smoother, but you definitely could blend them at the transitions if you wanted, and I think it would work great. This was such a fun way to like create this like black gradient. I'm thrilled with how it turned out. Now, before I go and twist up this first set, I wanted to bring over one of the sock blanks that I dyed. So you could see that we have some similarities, but there's also some differences. Because of the way the sock blank sort of transitions, there will be some more variegated patches between these different hues of gray. But what we're not going to have as much as that most pastel color through here. Yes, we might see some reverse speckling, but we're not going to have the more really pastel larger patches that we see here on the mini skeins. And proportionally, more of the sock blank is dark compared to the mini Skeins set, but that is something that would be easy to remedy by using less black dye when I'm doing the original dip dye on a sock blank, if I wanted it to be a closer match. So whether you try to dye a particular colorway that you have in your head on a sock blank versus on mini Skeins really depends on what you want to do with that yarn and what you want to create with the final garment. Are you going to use them all at once, one after the other? Well, then maybe you do want to use a sock blank. But with the sock blank, you're also going to get some speckling versus smooth color transitions. So if you want something that is really more of a deep tonal, then maybe you want to go with the mini Skeins. And this is what I mean by reverse speckling. If I take the sock blank and stretch it out, you can see those white patches. That's from the resist that we have in the stitches of the sock blank. And so those little white speckles will show up once the blank is unraveled. And so that's gonna bring a difference between the blank colorway and the mini Skeins. The Stroll and Hawthorn sock blanks are really similar to one another. The Stroll sock blank is a little bit longer, but there is more yardage in Stroll than in Hawthorn, so that just makes sense. But I think that the colorway looks great on both of them. The Hawthorn maybe almost feels a little more glazed, and I do also see that reverse speckling in there. The yarn mops from this colorway have a lot of similarities, and they feel like a bit of a smoky flame. The one difference is the yarn mop I created when I was making the sock blanks, because since I didn't flip that yarn multiple times when I was speckling, there was less of our warm colors to put on it. And I also added this into the dye bath. These turned out awesome, and they also have a very different feel from the main colorway, which sometimes is the way things end up working out. Here is that Crazy 8 mini Skeins set that I showed before. And here are the rest that we dyed in our first round. We've got the Crazy 8, the MCN High Twist, Platinum Sock, Platinum DK, Donegal Sock, and that Yak Sock. Now clearly, that Yak is sort of a standout from the rest with the way that the color's absorbed. But that really is because it's got a deeper base color than the other yarn. With this series, I love dyeing different yarn bases just to see both how they take up color and then also to see which techniques really shine on which bases. And I think that this colorway on the Donegal sock base is really pretty, but the Donegal neps aren't really enhancing the colorway. They look beautiful with it, especially in the deep base where you can see them pop a little more. But since the speckled yarn is a little bit busier to begin with, the neps become a little bit lost in with the colorway. And so you don't really see them much on the lightest skein. I still think it's gorgeous though. And especially if you enjoy the texture of a more tweed yarn, I think it's great. And I love the hints on the deepest one, but I think that I will probably not dye more of this Donegal base with this particular colorway. The yarn mops are quite different from our main colorway today, which not that that's a bad thing or anything like that, it's just an observation. It could be cool to take one of these yarn mops with these softer color transitions and to bring that in almost as a complementary color to one of these yarn bases. But I wouldn't even say that this colorway like fits with part of the set because it's a bit of a jump between the heavy speckles to like a soft tonal. You know, when the yarn was drying, it didn't feel like there was that much orange. Right now in this light, it's feeling very orange to me, but I think in hindsight, I would have used less of the red and maybe more of the orange, maybe, if I wanted a slightly better match to our Pokemon evolution. However, I think that we nailed a smoke and fire, coal and fire kind of feeling here for this fire Pokemon family. If you're wondering why I picked a Pokemon inspiration for this series, I spend many hours playing Pokemon Go or console games on the Nintendo Switch, and I have had this little Pokeball in the background here for a very, very long time. So this is not something super new. I guess there's been a hint here all along. But there was something about thinking about the evolution of Pokemon and the change in like shape, form, and color, and creating a mini Skein set where you have a shift of color over a set of 5 minis. And I thought that that would be just a really fun, natural integration to one another. But I will say that the Pokemon that I've picked for this series, I picked purely for aesthetic reasons, not necessarily because of any emotional connection I have to those Pokemon. Some of my very favorite Pokemon wouldn't have been as interesting of a color palette, and so I tried to pick interesting color palettes and then color palettes that varied from night to night. So that way you will have a different color palette every night as well as a different technique. I have wanted to do this inspiration for a series for a very, very long time. And I'm torn if in the vlog that I'll share at the end of the SMSMS, if I'm going to share some of the color palettes and Pokemon families that I ended up not using, but still played around with in my head. Is that something that you want me to include in the vlog? I have a feeling that at the time you're watching this video, I have not finished editing the vlog yet, but I could be wrong. I could be wrong. Maybe I had better time management than I thought. I was super excited, so I dyed a ton of yarn for this year's SMSMS, and so there is still some available in the ChemKnits Creations Etsy shop. Now, it's possible it's still a mystery, or I might have added a drop down so you could select which night. Since there are so many different yarn bases, it would be hard for me to say just off the top of my head in the chat which colors I have available which nights. And so if you're curious, you can always send me a message on Etsy and I can try to help you out. But as of filming these conclusions, I still have a handful of sock blanks, full skeins, and yarn mops left, but I also have multiple of the mini skein sets too. And they come with fun extras. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and thank you so much for joining me for this fun series. I adore joining the live chat and hanging out every night when these videos come out. Thank you so much for watching.